and also good morning and good afternoon and whatever time it is for people who have joined from other places of the world. We are again kickstarting, let's say, Science Policy Forum's activity in terms of STIP 2020, Science Technology Innovation Policy 2020. As many of you know that this In Conversation With series that we are having today, the second episode was launched by our Minister for Science and Technology and Earth Sciences and Health and Family Welfare, Dr. Harshavardhan, on 28th of August. And following that, today is the second episode. We are thankful that the Secretary, Department of Biotechnology, Government of India, Dr. Renu Swarup, is with us for this conversation. This is going to be pretty much a very free-flowing conversation. I'm also very glad to have our moderator for today, Sarah Iqbal, a communication lead from DBT Wellcome Trust India Alliance, and she's also very passionate about public engagement and communication of science. And thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us and coming on board. And this is going to be exciting. With that, I'm going to quickly give a housekeeping instruction and get the ball rolling for today. One is this entire session is live streamed on our YouTube channel, the Science Policy Forum YouTube channel. And this is also linked to all our social media accounts, and you could join from anywhere and add in your comments, questions, and suggestions using a hashtag chat with Renu Swarup. I repeat, hashtag chat with Renu Swarup. This is communicated to all of you through all our communications and outreach materials. Please pass on all your ideas, suggestions, comments, and questions. There is a segment in this entire show that we would be taking up all what you just say, and we will try to address each one of it. But if there are many, don't complain to us. With that, let me quickly also talk a little bit about the STIP 2020 process, which is running on for past few months. And we have been trying to reach each and every one through this process and making this Science Technology Innovation Policy 2020 exercise as more inclusive, more decentralized, and more involved exercise. And in one way or the other, this COVID situation has made it possible for us to help us reach to even the remotest communities in India. And that's, we already feel, as a success of this policy process. And we would like to take the spirit forward. As you all know, the Science Policy Forum, in partnership with the STIP 2020 Policy Secretariat, has formulated 6 activities. And the In Conversation is activity 1. And there are other activities which you could really look at in the Science Policy Forum website. And they're all open and they're all running in parallel, except the across the table panel discussion. In the In Conversation With series, as I already said, this is the second episode, and we are going to engage with a lot of thought leaders in this series, following Minister Harshavardhan and Secretary Renu Swarup. And with that, without further ado, I again request all of you to engage using the hashtag in all the social media platforms and add your comments in the YouTube live and pass on your comments and suggestions and ideas to us so that we can take it up and make this conversation more dynamic and vibrant. I'll quickly invite my co-moderator here and one of the leading public engagement expert, I would say, Sarah Iqbal from India Alliance, to introduce our special guest and take this forward. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chagun, for that kind introduction, and Nimita and the STIP 2020 team for inviting me to be in conversation with Dr. Renu Swarup. Even though Dr. Swarup doesn't need an introduction, I would still like to share a couple of her career highlights for some of you who might not be familiar with the Indian scientific ecosystem, to really put this conversation in perspective. So Dr. Swarup has served in the Department of Biotechnology for nearly 29 years, and her efforts and commitment have really taken DBT to new heights. Dr. Swarup has actively contributed in the formulation of India's biotechnology vision and strategy 2001 and a National Biotechnology Development Strategy in 2007 as the member secretary of the expert committee. Dr. Swarup has also been a member of the task force on women in science constituted by the Scientific Advisory Committee to the Prime Minister, and is the key person behind the launch of the DBT scheme on biotechnology career advancement for women scientists, BioCare. Dr. Swarup has been the managing director of the Biotechnology Industry Research Assistance Council, BIRAC, which is a public sector company incorporated by the Government of India to nurture and promote innovation research in the biotech enterprise with special focus on startups and small and medium enterprises. Through biotechnology, translational research, and industry academia partnerships, Dr. Swarup, with her team, has supported more than 1,000 startups and entrepreneurs and nearly 500 small companies for innovation research and product development. And in the year 2012, she was awarded the Biospectrum Person of the Year award. So, really delighted to be in conversation with Dr. Swarup today. And without much ado, I would now like to welcome and invite Dr. Swarup to deliver a brief address before we move into the question and answer session. So, over to you, Dr. Swarup.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you so much to the entire team here, which is putting together this series, and not just the series, but the entire interaction that you're having for the science technology policy. I think the way we are positioned today, and I heard you can say that the COVID pandemic has given you an opportunity to connect to the remote areas. You see, that's really what a strategy is. You find an opportunity even in the challenges which we are being faced with. So I think this is wonderful. The whole 4 to 5 months work that has gone in the preparation of the strategy. And it's also important because the strategy is as well as it's conceived and brought in, and the engagement of all stakeholders is important. I think this whole series that you have begun in conversation, which is one vertical of it, as you said, one activity, but I'm also aware that you're engaging at each level, whether it is at the ministerial level, whether it's at the NGO level, at the student level, the industry, startups, state governments, international. And that's what brings in the richness of this whole strategy that we are planning, and the science technology policy and innovation policy. And it's important for us to see that over these many years that our country has looked at, starting from the initial science technology policy resolution to going forward to the various science technology policies, and the last one which was brought out in 2013 on science technology and innovation. A lot of ground has been covered since then, and India today has got uh, the presence also, and also it's also important that we are looking at newer visions for ourselves. So congratulations to all of you. Greatly look forward to this next maybe 60 minutes or so of conversation with you, but more importantly engaging with the community to see what is it that we can tell, also understanding from them what their suggestions are, what their issues are, or which could be brought into this science technology policy. So thank you very much. And I'd especially like to thank Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, who's been steering this with your team. And as always, it's not easy to say no to Akhilesh. So it's always a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Swarup, for that encouraging words. And also, I just like to add one line, complimenting just what you said. Uh, the way that the leaders of DST, DBT, and all other scientific ministries and even non-scientific ministries coming together for this national policy exercise itself gives the team members, including myself, as a very good inclusive spirit, in a way that it is owned, also the responsibility is shared by every stakeholder in the scientific ecosystem. Not to leave the state governments, there are extraordinary support from the state government that they are on board for this exercise. And with that note, I'll again request Sarah to start the second segment of today's In Conversation with, in engaging you in this conversation. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Chankun. So, Dr. Swarup, as I mentioned in my introduction earlier, you have played a very important role in the formulation of India's biotechnology vision and strategy, and the biotechnology development strategy in 2007. So, what learnings would you like to share, which you think would be critical for the STIP 2020?
So, Sarah, it's very important to understand. Yes, I've been very fortunate that over these 30 years that I've spent in the government system, I've had the opportunity of being part of many visions, strategies which have been put into place. I think it's important, first of all, to understand why do we make a policy? Why do we make a strategy? What is it that we're wanting to do with that? And I think the key learning is that when you are putting a strategy or a policy in place, It's important, first of all, to make it as inclusive as it can. And I started by saying that this whole exercise that you are doing here is very inclusive. So that's the first key learning, that it must be inclusive. You must engage with all the stakeholders, because eventually every policy has to be implemented. And unless and until you have a strategy and action plan to implement that policy, the policy would only be as good as it has been put into the paper. But if you want to see it in action, then you need to work with the stakeholders. You need to understand from them what are the challenges, and more importantly, find solutions. And also, what is important in any strategy or vision or policy that we put in is to always think big. You remember one thing, that you're not making a policy which is only going to address today's requirements. Today, we are already doing with what we have. We are thinking about tomorrow. We are thinking about the larger vision of what the country is going to be. And that really is what needs to come out into these policies. So that was a very key learning. And also, as we move on, what is the value we are adding to what we had done last time? So it's always important to do an introspection and see, what did we put in our last policy? What were the key actions there? What is it that we could not fulfill? There must have been genuine reasons why we did not fulfill that. Are we bringing in the right ecosystem and the right policies now? And it's also important to bring in the policies which then take into account what has happened so far and add value to it by taking it to the next stage. So I think that's a key learning that we have as we take it forward.
That's really helpful, and I'm sure the STIP 2020 team has taken a note of all these valuable suggestions and lessons you've shared just now. So, I mean, you entered the biotech space very early on when it was still quite immature, and you've since been part of its growth story. So, what do you think could be the most disruptive and out of the box ideas for revamping the biotech sector in India going forward?
So biotechnology, the way it is, it can only move forward if you have disruptive and out of box ideas. Because if
Right.
you, biotechnology and technology is changing so fast that you need to keep pace with it, but you also, as I said, keep, need to think very, very far and say what is it that's going to bring in uh, something interesting, but also something which adds value to it. So the biotech sector is very unique. When we talk about biotechnology sector, it actually is something, when we talk about verticals and you talk about horizontals, it actually covers all of them. It's got horizontals and verticals. It cuts across all areas, interdisciplinary. It goes through, it touches every area, whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, whether it's industry. And it's all about new emerging technologies and tools, combining them with the existing conventional technologies. So, an out of box idea for transforming the biotech sector is primarily, how can biotech play a very, very central role in the key activities which are around all these various sectors. It's also important that when we look at the biotech sector today, we do not think of those conventional domains and disciplines through which we attract our human resource. See, the sector moving forward is all going to depend on the strength of our human resource. That's our foundation. That's our whole foundation on which we build this whole sector. Today, we cannot say biotech means you'll only look at the biology stream, or you'll only look at the maybe things which are looking at the conventional streams. If you look at exactly what we are doing even today, and even the DBT Wellcome Trust Alliance with which you are associated, we look at bringing the clinicians together, we think at bringing the engineering groups together, the biologists together. We are moving forward, bringing in the physics, the so any sector you're looking at, data sciences. So I think what is disruptive is, do not define any one sector as what contributes to biotech. Look at opportunities which biotechnology offers across every sector. Only when we do that can we think of really transforming this whole larger biotech sector growth. And that's why we started by saying we'll be 100 billion by 2025, and then very early on we realized that we had underestimated our ambitious targets, and we said we're going to be 150 billion. So that's because it's a much larger field that we work with. So that's really how biotech has to look at its growth.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Swarup. I mean, you talked about human resource, so I do have a question that actually has been on many people's mind during the pandemic, which is of the plight of early career researchers. And because they form the major workforce in science, and they're really the engine of, you can say, scientific research. So, and I think they mainly they face challenges in publishing and funding in career progression in general. So, what do you think? What, in your view, can be some systemic interventions that can be brought in to better support early career researchers in the country?
So I think, Sarah, you made a very important point, and that's exactly what I said. That if we are looking at projections, if we are putting out a policy for the future, we are totally dependent on what the strength of our foundation is, and this is the human resource, the young. In fact, I would say even our young graduates and our undergrads, they are the one, because they are the ones who are going to come in a few years later. So, what is important is, so even though you asked me the question on early career, I'll go a little earlier and say we have to start focusing on them to see how we build that strength. One is our education system, on how we make that very strong. Having said that, you really come up then with quality human resource. And that quality human resource really then moves into becoming our early career researchers and our key drivers, as you said. And they are the ones who are, fueling that entire research pipeline that is moving ahead. Now, there are challenges. The challenges is, of course, nobody underestimates the value that they put into this whole ecosystem. But the challenge is, what are those career options for them? What do we have sufficient? Now, the career options, again, if you look at conventional career options, there are limitations to it. If you're looking at what really are those career options in research laboratories of the government, aided by the government, or universities, we have a fixed number of positions that are there. There again, yes, there are fund limitations, and the fund limitations are not just within the government of India or in India. It's becoming a global scenario where things are demanding more resources. So how do we take it forward? Then that becomes a challenging question. So I think you have to look at innovative ways of financing, innovative ways of taking our research forward. And I always keep saying that when we talk about innovation, and I think that's a key message which the STIP Secretariat should look at, your science, technology, innovation policy is not just about bringing in innovation in the research that we do, but innovations in terms of the modalities of implementation, the innovations in terms of the policies that we bring in, and also innovation in terms of how do we look at new financing options and others. So I think what is important is that now is the time. As I said, we do not obviously look at single streams. So it has to be multiple streams which come together. Similarly, it has to be multiple stakeholders who come together. You cannot have an academic stream separate, or an industry stream separate, or a philanthropic group separate. They all have to come together. And once we do that, we complement each other's strength, you will see that we will be able to attract more finance. So the government puts in some finances, those act as a catalyst. With that catalyst, we create very good shared infrastructure. Once we create that shared infrastructure, we then have projects which run. In those projects, and along with those projects, we have a lot of human resource which comes in. We then have innovative schemes like the DBT Wellcome Trust Alliance, we have the Ramalinga Swami, we have the Ramanujam Fellowship, we have many such bilaterals, etc., which allow early career fellows to come in. We are also, in fact, the Department of Biotechnology itself is now looking at bringing in an early career postdoc research fellowship. That's there in the, it's being currently worked on. Let us see how quickly we can launch that, because that is going to be something which is very interesting. Again, the numbers would be limited, because we obviously have hope that we have a larger number. So we have to look at collaborations, international collaborations, industry collaborations. So those would be good opportunities for us to look at. There are also many opportunities which we have because India partners with many international organizations. We have partnerships, we are members with the HFSPO, we are members with the EMBO, EMBL. They all offer fellowships In fact, when I looked at some of these recently, I saw that we do not even put in enough applications to these international bodies. Why is it that we are not doing that? So I think somewhere we have to also see, are we compromising on the quality of our applications, and that's why we don't have sufficient. So there are opportunities which we need to tap in, but yes, we could always look at newer opportunities that come in. But having said that, I think it's important for us to see that we can strengthen this, and bring in different ways. There could be contract career paths, there could be other ways in which we allow their career growth as well, give them the opportunity to do their independent research, but also most importantly build our next line of leadership. And I think that is what we are looking at.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Swarup. A question that came in when we had announced the event was about involving the Indian diaspora, scientific diaspora, in mentoring and guiding the younger generation. So, what are your thoughts on that, engagement
Absolutely.
with the Indian diaspora?
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. In fact, not just the Indian diaspora, I always feel that we need to have very, very strong mentor groups. And I think that's one thing which within the country we need to build, and probably in this policy we need to focus on that. We have already started it in different sectors. In the biotech sector, for the startup ecosystem, we have created a very strong mentor group, but I think that's required. And why so? Because we do have these excellent scientists, researchers, and as I said, for all the groups of science and technology, it's an interdisciplinary field. So you don't need to have domain specialists only who become mentors and mentors. So if you're looking at biotech sector, you can't just have 2 or 3 domain areas that you pick up from. But the vast experience that comes in terms of your technical mentorship, but also more importantly, how do you progress in your career path? What are those leadership qualities that you need to bring in? Most importantly today, and I see that as we've moved through our many years of funding, we've moved from single investigator projects to multiple investigator to single institute to multiple institutes, and now from single agency to multiple agencies, and from single country to bilateral and multilateral. So what does that need? That requires researchers to be excellent team players, because you have to be a team player. You, unless you're a team player, you cannot work with them. Now this requires a lot of mentoring, because generally a scientist is more comfortable being within their own areas and working within themselves. So you have to bring in a lot of leadership qualities, and I think the Indian diaspora, which is positioned globally, brings in a lot of experience, not just in terms of the technical, but they also bring in a lot of new cultural values to us. There is a work culture that exists overseas, which at many times when we come back from overseas, we say, I can do this very well, but this work culture doesn't exist in my institute. Why doesn't it exist? Why is it that the same scientist who goes to the US or goes to the European laboratory and comes back and says, well, I did so well in the Boston cluster there, or in the San Diego cluster, but I don't have a cluster in India. Who builds those clusters? The scientists, the researchers build those clusters. So if you could build it there, why not here? So I think the Indian diaspora's participation, and just not the Indian diaspora, all experts and mentors, we need to focus on getting very, very strong mentor networks created.
Great points, Dr. Swarup, and completely agree with you on engaging with not just the Indian diaspora, but experts across the board. So, again, if I go back to the topic of the human resource, a very important subset of that, the women in science. And even though the status of women in science has seen some improvement over the years, underrepresentation of women, particularly at the leadership position, remains a challenge for Indian science. And I'm sure this would probably hold true for other sectors too. You are seen as a role model by many of us, many people. So it would be great to hear from you about your experience so far as a woman in science, and also if you could perhaps offer some suggestions on what we can do, what measures can be put in place to address this issue, to bring in more women into the scientific workforce?
So Sarah, this is obviously a topic which is very close to my heart, and I could do a full series with you just talking about women in science and how we could take it forward. So I think yes, you've said rightly. Things have changed over the last couple of years, not just within the country but globally as well. See, we also have to understand that why is there an underrepresentation? The underrepresentation is because our base is not large enough. So anything that moves up from the base, it has to be obviously in a pyramid manner. So if you don't have a very strong foundation or a base in numbers, I'm not talking about the quality, but what we have in terms of the base is excellent in quality because we don't compromise on quality at all. So I think our focus has to be in sort of enhancing that base first. So we have to go right back to the school education level and see that we do not have dropouts at that point. And now let's not talk just about the urban sector or the elite sector, because for India, what matters is our rural population. That's really what our larger population is, where our where we are going to bring in. And there's a lot of talent there, believe me. There's a lot of intelligence, there's a lot of competence that's there. Whenever I've interacted with school children from the district level, we did this whole science village when we did the International Science Festival, and we had children who came from every district in the country. And each time when I interacted with them, I could see they were such a vibrant group. And my only worry and concern was how many of them are we going to lose out as we move forward? So I think that is where we have to focus. The Department of Science and Technology has started some very interesting schemes of Vigyan Jyoti and others, which are going to now facilitate this movement as we move ahead. So I think once we focused on that, you will automatically see that you'll have more women. Because why did we look at Vigyan Jyoti and other schemes? Because you were seeing that in the biology sector, we were being able to attract women. But if you look at the IITs and the engineering sector, we did not. If you look at those numbers, so why were they not being able to go there? It was not just because the interest was not there. We did identify challenges that maybe they were not being sent to enough coaching schools. They did not have in their own socio-economic, cultural values were not allowing them to go ahead. So I think it's important for us, India as a country, to address those. See how we could take education to them where they are. Having done that and having built this very strong base, it's then important for us to see how do we bring in those leadership qualities into them. And that many a times we've seen is also because when we look at the way women have moved ahead, if you see in biological sciences, we are fortunate. And if you see in DBT, the numbers have really increased in terms of the women participation, not just as the scientists. DBT itself has a large number of women scientists who are there. BIRAC is more driven by women than men that we have, but also in terms of the investigators. But I think there my message is to those young women researchers. You have to do an introspection to see where your strengths are. You have a lot of inherent strength. And many a times we make our own boundaries and we say, this is where I can go and this is where I cannot go. I think it's important for women to identify and say, well, there are no boundaries in that. What is important and what is challenging, as you are a professional. And as a professional, what is important is your hard work. If you have hard work to do, if you are going to deliver your best, you're going to be determined to achieve what you have to do. Nothing is going to hold you back. And these leadership qualities have to come from inside you. Once we've built a strong base, women have been given sufficient opportunities to get into leadership, nothing is going to hold them back. And I think that is my message to women. You have inherent qualities in you, you have inherent strength in you. Just bring out the best in you. Be determined and focused with hard work, and do not ask for any incentives or compromise in the quality of your work. You do need relaxations in terms of your flexi hours. You need relaxations in terms of age relaxations because of career breaks. But once you get into the work, you outperform many others. So I think that really is my message to them. And India is doing well, but we could probably try to see how we build this foundation.
Great.
I said
Thank you
I'll
so much.
talk more for the women because that's close to my heart.
Absolutely. No, those were, I can't help but agree with you that what we're seeing in women in science is really a reflection of society, and I think where we are, with women in the workforce in general across sectors. And I think there's a lot that we can do to improve the status of women in the workforce across the board. Dr. Swarup, you did mention briefly about the need for international collaborations. And the current pandemic has also highlighted the importance of international collaborations. DBT has been at the forefront of many of these bilateral, multilateral, multi-institution collaborations. So maybe for the audience, if you could tell us a bit more about the need for such international alliances, these networks in science and technology, how should we nurture them, and really what is their significance for a country like India? So.
So, Sarah, international collaborations are key, and that's a strength that we need to leverage on. And I think the Department of Biotechnology recognized this and the value of this partnership even at the time of its inception. If you look at when DBT got established in 1986, the first very, very strong collaboration that we built was the Indo-US Vaccine Action Program. Today, I can say with a lot of satisfaction that if today we are being able to move in our vaccine efforts, a lot of the credit goes to the leadership and to the expert advice which came from this vaccine action program. Very unique partnership. There was no funding involved in these partnership. This partnership was not a bilateral where each country put money on the table. Each one had their own money. They went through their national. What was important, and that goes to your question that you asked me just before this. It was all about the expert advice and the mentorship being given to our key people here. But having said that, I think as we moved on, and this is true for all science sectors, I just said it that we moved from being a single agency to multi-agency and from single country programs to multilateral cooperation programs. I think it's why because science has no boundaries, science recognizes no borders. This is a global challenge that all of us look, and very rightly said, COVID has brought it right before us at this point of time. Today, there is no country which has got different objectives for tackling COVID. All of us are collectively tackling COVID in the same way. We need to have a pool of diagnostics, vaccines, therapeutics which can help us to cure. The global community came together and said, we are going to address it together. We are going to fight this challenge together. Just imagine a situation if countries were not collaborating, if there were no connections, who would you have connected with virtually? Today you can connect virtually because you've met physically, you've had such strong bonds that you've built between countries, between research groups, and that is what you're now taking forward virtually to be able to work together. In this time of, when we had supply chain disruptions, we had all the lockdowns, what were our scientists doing? Everyone was a phone call away. You could just pick up the phone call, have a virtual meeting, exchange ideas, exchange knowledge, and that's why we have these global alliance which has delivered so beautifully. Science is delivering so beautifully for the COVID challenge. Any sector, and I obviously draw on experiences from biotech, etc., but you look at any sector, every sector, we've really added value to our alliance because of international collaborations. And again, this also is important because we just spoke about the financial crunch that everyone is facing. There is a So it's important for us to come together so that we complement each other. We do not reinvent the wheel. We do not invest in the similar things which are there. Today, we are talking about access to shared infrastructure, and not just within the country, globally as well. We are talking about training opportunities where students from here, researchers from here can share and have training opportunities globally in every sector. And now it's not just one way. India has now moved to a situation where we are no longer just the receivers of technology or training. We're becoming co-development partners. And I think this is what the new India is. And I'm sure this will be captured in the new policy that we're bringing out, that India occupies a very different position now. India is a preferred partner for S&T collaboration. Look at the large number of S&T collaborations we have. So I think globally, we are a connected world, and science and technology is connecting everybody together. And I don't think we have the right to draw any boundaries where science and technology is concerned. So that's really the strength of our partnership.
Absolutely, very rightly said. I think we are no ones to draw these boundaries around
I can't
science. And
hear you, Sarah. I can't hear you any longer.
can you hear me now? Is it
That's it.
better?
Yeah.
I'm very sorry about the audio issues. No, I was just agreeing with you, Dr. Swarup, about that science has no boundaries, and that knowledge has no boundaries. It should be accessible to everyone, really. Note, I can't help but ask you a question that is close to the kind of, and which is about around public communication of science and engagement, public engagement with science. So, what are your views on how well we are doing in India in terms of public communication of science and engagement with the public, and what is that we should really be doing more of to bridge this gap between science and society to build public's trust and support for science? Your views on that?
So, Sarah, one thing is clear: scientists per se are never very good communicators. They always need to work with communication groups, and I'm so glad that you have, and people like you have come into the system who have a very, very good. And in fact, that's very important for some of the questions that we spoke about a short while ago. That let's not look at conventional streams of science communicators, science people who look at the science technology, commercializations. All those streams are very, very important, and those are, remember, newer career opportunities which probably should be considered as well. So, coming back to your question about science communication, I think we've started getting better. That's the only word I can use, but we still need to do much, 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 much more. There are two aspects of it. One is the communication of the science that we are doing as a whole. So that needs to be communicated, not just to the society and to the other stakeholders at the grassroots, but even to our scientific community. Many a times, what we do within the country, unless and until we've got excellent collaborations, we don't even project to the global world that this is what we've been able to do, because we haven't really got the best science communication out. And again, when I say this, I'm not talking about that uh, small sector of those national laboratories and elite institutions who have capacity to do that. I'm again and again referring to the large scientific workforce that we have in our universities and our remote colleges. And believe me, we have not been able to tap their potential so far because of these challenges that we have. So I think our science communication of the scientific part, I'll come to the society subsequently and the public engagement, but even our scientific communication, I think we really need to reach out there. And this is something which from the center we need to do. Probably we need to bring in more of these NGOs and other such organizations who work with us, communication groups, and reach out to these smaller institutes. And probably that's where we need to build some sort of city clusters, which then take on the responsibility of nurturing and mentoring tier 2, tier 3, and even the remote cities together. So you can't do it, there cannot be one communication strategy for the whole country. A country like India is basically, we need to have diverse sort of strategies. So we will have to, in fact, for communication, we have to go beyond even regional aspect. We'll have to go to these city clusters sort of an aspect so that you can go deep down. So that's where our scientific communication is. And believe me, if you go down there, you'll see very interesting science happening there. Sometimes when we go to these, school level competitions, and I still recall that we had these school level competitions which we had done with I think the Dr. Anil Gupta's team and some of the Atal Tinkering Labs. and some of the Shrishti and the Gaiti awards that Biotech does with Dr. Anil Gupta's team, and young students, they came to the Rashtrapati Bhavan to present to the Honorable President. And what interesting science and innovation ideas. We would have never got to know that. So that's one stream of science communication which we need to focus on. The second is, of course, the public engagement. I think that's very crucial and very, very important. And there, I think, again, we need to build very strong teams, because that science communication cannot be done by a scientist alone, cannot even
Mm.
be done by scientists who are communicators. You need to bring in the socioeconomic aspect of it. You need to bring in the environmental aspect of it. You need to bring in, the livelihoods, the employment, because science has tangible benefits. There are a lot of intangibles which we cannot really measure. It's also important when these policies that we are doing or any new initiatives that we are bringing in, you need to get the feedback from the ground level. So it's more important taking our success stories to them and saying, well, this is what we've done, these are these technologies we've developed, can we demonstrate? We are doing that. We are setting up these rural technology clusters, and we are taking technologies to them. But many a times it's important to understand their challenges, and it has to be a bottom up approach for devising our schemes and also devising solutions that we would do there. And
Mm.
for that, DBT has started a program called the Biotech Kisan Hubs. The Biotech Kisan Hubs are very different from normal KVKs. We don't take technologies to them. We sit with the farmers and understand what are their challenges, and then we do research based on that. So I think this sort of a public engagement is important, because then your acceptance of your new technology is better. You're
Absolutely.
not developing a technology and going to them and saying, adopt it. You
Right.
have actually worked with them and said, they come up and say, this is my problem. You actually work with them. So they become your partners in taking that.
Yeah.
And believe me, uh, the communication that is done at that level, if
Mm.
one farmer succeeds, you have all farmers accepting that technology. You don't need a
Mm.
communication strategy after that, because
Mm.
success, once demonstrated and showcased, will replicate itself immensely. So I think it's important for us to follow this two-way approach. One is, of course, taking newer technologies to them, but the other is working with them to identify their challenges, and that's really what a public engagement is for new technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the participatory process of doing science and making it more inclusive by bringing in people who actually benefit from it is really important. And I also agree with you that no, one size will not fit all. I think we'll have to change our communication strategy depending on who we are trying to reach out to, and what's the objective really. So thank you so much, Dr. Swarup. We tried to pack a lot in the last 20 minutes or so. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts so openly, and really enjoyed listening to your views on these various aspects of life in science. So with that, I will now maybe invite my co-moderator, Chagun, to help me steer the audience question and answer session. So Chagun, can you come in, please?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Dr. Swarup. I think you made our job much easier. I was really hesitant to go through all the questions that are flowing in from the social media, but you actually opened up a lot, and it has been a very honest conversation between you and Sarah. So that is going to make our next 20 to 25 minutes much easier, I believe. I hope I can freely post questions which are coming from anywhere, and then Sarah and I will jointly do the ping pong of the thoughts that are coming from other places. So
And
I will
Chagun, I have a suggestion. In case you have some key questions which are left out, but they fall into thematic areas, I'll be happy to answer them offline after we finish with this.
that's that's like a cherry on top. So which means we are not only going to take your time during this call, we are going to take your time after this call. So that's excellent. Thank you so much for that offer as well. But let me begin with some of the governance related questions which we didn't touch probably in the conversation in the previous segment. There are 2-3 people who have asked about how are we actually going to do what you just said about preparing for the future. which means this is the fifth national science technology policy after India's independence. And if we are to have this policy work for us in a way that we would like to see an uncharted territory or uncharted future, how are we going to prepare? Do you have any advice or a strategy to follow in this process?
So one is, don't limit yourself in terms of your vision. As Sarah said, out of box thinking. What you think out of box today is probably going to be the norm when you get into 3 years down the line. So it's important for us to think big. I think that's because today we are at a position where we can think big. So I think that's important, that's key, and that is really how we can prepare ourselves for that. Once you've thought about it, many things may seem unrealistic today when you put them in paper and say, well, how can we do that? We've not even thought about it. You have to then come back and say, how do you prepare for it? The question that you just asked. And I think it's important that we prepare for it, keeping three major verticals for science and technology in mind. One is, as I said, you cannot prepare for anything unless you prepare the human resource. So, first of all, our preparation has to be for the human resource for that. Unless you build capacities, you can't think big. So the capacities have to be key. Everybody would want to have the best skilled human resource for that. So we must start planning now. If we need to get into newer technologies or newer main areas, our capacities have to be built right now. We then have to look at our infrastructure, which is going to be geared up. Because if you build excellent capacities, they're going to obviously need access to that infrastructure. Now, that infrastructure may be available nationally, or as I said, we've built some wonderful collaborations, global, bilateral, multilateral. How do we leverage those collaborations? So there must be some very well structured mechanisms through which we can have access to those. The third vertical that you have, or the text vertical rather, you have is in terms of the preparing for the new technologies per se. So, your science that goes behind it, the research that goes behind it. And I think there again, collaborations is key for it. And we have to start working on those collaborations as we move towards it. The fourth most important sector for it is what is going to be the applications of those? Where are we wanting to see the application? So I think having science, many times the challenges we face is we bring in the technologies, we bring in what really is the newer areas, but we've not really brought in the end users right at the beginning of it. So many times our technologies, we've either not developed the right technologies or we have not really been able to get them to accept it. So I think when we do a long-term planning, again, going back to your initial point, is inclusiveness, preparing for the future by focusing on each of the aspects. You can't leave out, and most importantly, the finances, obviously, but the finances will have to come in, again, innovative ways of financing and seeing how we take it forward. So you'll have to prepare for it, focusing on each of the verticals.
Perfect. Sarah, over to you.
Yes, I think the question that that I'm going to pose to you from the audience member is something that you have really emphasized a lot on, which is building capacity. Somebody's asked, as we aim to become Atmanirbhar, a larger concern is about building competencies. So, what in your view is how can STI policy and DBT initiatives can achieve self-reliance in biotech innovation?
So, starting with the capacity building that we said, I think what is key and critical is that while we build a lot of capacities through the extramural project funding that we do, and that's very important. Remember one thing, a competitive grant system is very important to build capacities for research scientists, and that must continue, because that is then everything cannot be strategically driven. You cannot push everybody into an envelope. You have to allow a scientist's mind to go and look for newer ideas and look for newer areas that a scientist would want to do. But having said that, it's important then to identify those few key sectors where we would want to have strategic competence in terms of newer areas or technologies. Say, for example, today, now we're talking about the data sciences, artificial intelligence, we're talking about gene editing, and that's the biotech sector that I'm talking about. Now here, when we look at it, we keep saying, yes, we've done that, but we are still way behind some of the overseas countries in terms of our application part of it. Our translational work is not going into that. So we need to build dedicated centers of excellence for new and emerging technologies. This is also not for just those technologies that are currently identified, but we must have a very, very strong technology forecasting group. And I think that technology forecasting group is what is going to look at what could be the potential 3 years from now. If today we're all talking about quantum technologies, we're talking about quantum physics, we do have quantum biology that's being talked about, but nobody is talking about it in terms of application today. Is quantum biology actually going to have an application? Maybe there's going to be a newer area that's going to come in. What are we looking at? What could be the various applications? I think a technology forecasting group is key and critical, but then that has to be so well connected with our centers for new and emerging technology. And we've actually put it in our own DBT strategy for the next 5 years, and CONES is what we call it, Center for New and Emerging Technologies. And you have to remember one thing, the cone is important. It depends on how you place the cone. If you place it on its base, you're going to have the pyramid going up. But if you just put it with the one little idea, you can have a large funnel that's going to give you and pull in all the people. So cone is very interesting depending on how you position it. So that's really what we would like to see for competence building.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Swarup. Over to you, Jagan, for the next question.
Yeah. So, Dr. Swarup, this over to you is a signal that, okay, we are going to juggle through all the questions and come up with the toughest one. So let me touch upon a little critical aspect which many people have raised in our YouTube conversation right now. There is a parallel conversation going on, by the way, in YouTube. People say that the resources for doing science come from primarily government sources today. And if at all we could, how do we expand it? Also, how do we diversify it? It's not necessary always that only the government actors have to be the resource provider, because the beneficiaries are also from every other. Do you have any thoughts on to dwell upon this idea?
So we've been actually discussing this for years now, and we keep saying that the government's spend on the science GDP is, sort of stagnant on 0.8 or 0.79 or whatever numbers come out. How do we take it to 2%? We keep talking about it. See, it's important to see that these numbers are important, but it's also important to say who all are participating in this whole thing. What is the whole, is the science growth in the country? Are we looking at just the government being a key player for it? But no. The whole science technology policy that you are developing today also, look at the large number of stakeholders you brought in. So I think it's important for us to see that clearly one thing is evident, that science cannot work in silos. Science has to work with every stakeholder. And if every stakeholder puts in their complementary finances to it, that's how the larger volumes will come in. So if you're funding a particular piece of research, and that particular piece of research has a number of manpower or human resource trained, and then that is just one project and it closes there, it hasn't been an optimal use of the finances that you put in. If you add value to it by connecting with larger teams, so those are those innovative ways of financing that I spoke about. The private sector has been investing, they've come forward to invest. But what happens is, currently, we see, as I said, we sort of, we put them into silos. This is the private sector research, this is the government sector research. It doesn't happen like that. If we have to come forward for a growth, and I think moving forward into this policy, there can be no, when I spoke about science having no boundaries globally, there can be no boundaries or borders between academic research and industry research and startup research. It's research that we are doing for the growth of the country, for taking India to the next position. So everyone is an equal contributor. And I think we do need to bring in certain changes to see how the government and the academic research funds can come together. We have examples. I mean, the DBT itself, if you see, BIRAC has it's a government body, it's a public sector, and it funds startups, it funds industries. So if it's there in one vertical of the government, surely it can happen in others as well. So we need to bring in those policy changes. We need to bring in these uniform policies which allows this to happen. We are looking at setting up knowledge translational clusters. We're looking at setting up technology clusters. That's already been put into our own strategy and policy for the biotech sector and for the science sector as well. So, what happens in a knowledge cluster? You bring in the academia, you bring in the industry, and you bring in the startups, and they seamlessly work together. You're not then asking the industry to put in any funds, it automatically comes into the same common pool. So, you see, that's how you bring in. Once that comes in, we never factor in the funds which investors are today putting into the startups to help their research grow. After all, that is also funding going in for, it may not be a funding. Now, what are you calling funding? Is only grants a funding? No. Funding is financing. It's putting finances forward to allow science to move from one level to the other. So, what so many of our startups today, science startups, our tech startups, are being able to attract, you're able to attract Series A and Series B funding. Is that not financing coming in? So somewhere we need to have a very good system in which we also bring in what really is the finances. How do we actually calculate the finances? You'll see probably we'll have a much larger number. So I think innovative models is my last word to it. Innovative models in which we can enhance that is important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swarup. I think that question was very well answered, and I also saw the recent news from one of the BIRAC supported startup idea getting so much fund for expansion. I think Pandora's and Tuhin Textile and all of that, and congratulations to him. There's a big shout out for that. Sarah, over to you for the next question.
Sure. Thank you, Shagun. So, Dr. Swarup, DBT has collaborations with
It looks like there is a bandwidth issue. Yeah, now go ahead, Sarah. Yes, please.
Okay, maybe I'll switch off my video for now. So, Dr. Sarup, my question is about around collaborations with non-government organizations that DBT has, like Wellcome Trust, Bill Gates Foundation, EMBO, and so on. What, in your view, are some major bottlenecks you feel that need to be addressed in the new STIP, in the new STI policy, to leverage really the participation of such non-profits in the sector? And it would also be nice to learn from you about what is that we might be doing right already.
So I'll start with the second part first, Sarah, because there's a lot that we are doing right now. And I think that is what should be picked up to be able to then expand on that and take those examples for different sectors. So as I said, any collaboration is very important and fruitful if there is a common goal and a common objective which that partnership is bringing in. So these sort of partnerships that we bring in come up with a level of mutual trust, with a common objective, and with a shared vision and goal that you're taking forward to be able to achieve that. And I think once we do that, then there are no challenges to be able to achieve. Because then, if there is a mutual trust, if you have a shared vision, you are collectively, even the challenges which come in, you are collectively working together to find solutions to overcome those. And I think that really is the strength. And any partnership can only succeed if it is built on this strong foundation. We have excellent examples. You've said it already, the DBT Wellcome Trust Alliance. DBT has a wonderful partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with Wellcome Trust, not just the alliance for the programs that we've taken up, with the USAID, with many others. I can't even name them, and also with many other organizations which are sector specific. We've gone into collaborations for the agriculture sector. We've gone into collaborations for the AMR. We just became partners in the Global AMR Hub. We've had BIRAC sign an MOU with Carbex to take AMR forward. So we are partners in the International Cancer Genome Initiative. So there are different types of partnerships. As I said, every partnership is not about bringing in funding together. Sometimes there are partnerships which is also about exchanging information, bringing knowledge. So those are knowledge partnerships. And I think those partnerships are really the strength. And these are the partnerships that need to move ahead. So whenever we are looking at a partnership, whenever we are looking at the participation of India in these partnerships, we should not always see what are really the challenges in terms of the finances. And I'll give you an example of SEPI. India was a founding member for SEPI when SEPI was set up, and it was a coalition for epidemic preparedness. Now, at that point of time, it was agreed that all countries who come together will put in their resources into the common SEPI pool, and we would look at preparing vaccines for epidemics. We never thought of a pandemic at that point of time. And then came the pandemic in our lifetime, and SEPI suddenly had to look at delivering for a pandemic. Now, we looked at innovative financing models because our Government of India model gave us a provision in which we could partner, but there were challenges in actually getting part of the larger funding pool. So we set up an INSEPI component, and we have an aligned strategy document that we've signed where INSEPI and SEPI together come and fund um, partners, industries, and others for vaccine development. So you see, there are innovative models of partnership also which come forward. And I'm sure the science technology policy can include these so that it gives an opportunity to different organizations. And one place where we should focus on, and this is a message for the Secretariat, is currently all our partnerships are more driven by the center. We need to engage the state governments. We need to bring in the science, technology, strength into the state government. And I think only then can we move forward, because there will be a level of ownership that will come in. And they should also be part of this, and maybe collaborations then we'll be able to take on many more, both national and international.
Thank you, Dr. Swarup. Chagan, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Dr. Swarup, so I'm going in the decibel level of little more trickiness, I would say. I'll take it from where you left in terms of national partnerships, international partnership, and bringing in state government. That's exactly where the next set of thoughts are also coming in. There are usually criticism that policies are excellent, but exactly it failed in implementation. Repeatedly, people say that. And if we don't want that to be repeated in this policy, there are also suggestions coming saying that we should actually break the silos not only in horizontals, which means not only in the central government level line ministries, sectoral departments and agencies, but also vertically between states and state ministries and state agencies, and then connect them with not only at the national level, integrate them, the states and horizontal ministries, but also bring the opportunities both ways from the international side till the state. So the granularity flowing between the largest to the smallest. In your thoughts, how do you think we can really get this ball in hand, like get this going really in the implementation?
So that's just what I alluded to in my last response, saying that the state governments and the states should be a part of it. So you very rightly said it, Chagun, that the policy is perfect, but unless and until you have an implementation plan and an action plan going down to the granular levels of each and every activity that you list out in the policy, you won't be able to take it forward. So first of all, my suggestion is, when you make an action plan, when you make an implementation plan, identify the point person who's going to be responsible for its implementation. And even if it is across ministries, within ministry, there has to be a first point of contact, the person who's the first responsible person. And unless you have a first responsible person, it'll again fall between the cracks. So I think that's most important, because this is going to be now a policy that we're looking at, which is not going to be driven just by one ministry or one department. It's a policy which is going to have all stakeholders, not just the government, but the private sector as well. And when you are making this policy, you're engaging with them. So they have to take an ownership of this policy. It cannot be that this is a policy the government is only doing this of bringing it together, but it's a policy which is owned by every science agency, researcher, anybody engaged in science. So I think that's foremost important. So you can sort of pinpoint on each activity. Your question that you basically asked is, how do you connect on either side, taking so this is some way again related to what I said. Even when you're doing a technology development and public engagement, let's not just take the policies or the opportunities and go to them and say, this is what we have implemented. We need to understand from them What is it that they would like? Again, it's not a one size that fits all. Different states have different requirements. You have some states which have progressed, which have a wonderful ecosystem. Some states may have a different requirement. Some states may require policy interventions to be able to connect their scientific community, because they have a very, very rich scientific ecosystem that is there. Some states may require technology going to their societal level to be able to bring solutions for their agriculture sector. Some may want it for these scientific solutions for enhancing livelihood opportunities. Some may want solutions which look at their livestock sector. So you will have to, again, it's not going to be easy. So the policy is going to be a generic umbrella statement which allows this to happen. Under this policy, you will have to make separate action plans and implementation strategies which will cover both the verticals and the horizontals, as you said. Now here there are certain overarching principles that you will have to draw upon, and in those overarching principles you will have to keep a few things in mind. One is, when we talk about capacity building, we will have to make sure that this is pan India. We make sure that we go to the tier 2, tier 3 cities. We do not just create certain centers, but these centers are given, and there the mentor mentee concept must come in. You will have to identify centers of excellence as mentor institutes who take on the responsibility of working with their affiliated colleges, etc. So that's your main approach that you'll have to follow. So it has to be pan India for your human resource. Similarly, your second overarching principle is, when you talk about international collaborations, I know when we talk about international collaborations, we obviously focus on the quality. And many a times, because we've not been able to nurture the quality in these remote institutes and universities, they are never at that opportunity to be able to reach these international competitive grants, etc. We must have special mechanisms in which we allow tier 2, tier 3, and remote university students to go for training and leadership development opportunities overseas as well. So we must have different ways in which we do these training programs. They cannot have just one training program in which we throw it as an all India open competition. Definitely these people are not going to come into it. So you can take the C's to the B level to the A level, and the A level to the A plus, but you can't take a C level to an A plus immediately. It has to be a graded way that you do it, and I think that we have to work with them. So you'll have to make overarching principles in which you will then draw up these verticals and horizontals, each with its own implementation and action plan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swarup. I think Sarah is trying to pick one final question that can actually bring her closer to it. Sarah, go ahead.
So, Dr. Swarup, the final question today for you is, what is that one thing you would like to change about the research culture we have in India, and one thing you wouldn't want to change? It could be two as well, but whatever.
that is a tough one, Sarah. But what would I not want to change is what I would look at first. I think what I would not want to change is that India has, we have a diverse population. We have diversity in our culture and diversity in whatever we do. And many a times, in fact, most of the times, when we are planning and we are doing our science research, we bring in this diversity into it. And I think that diversity brings in a lot of value to what we do, because it's not stereotyped. It automatically draws in the diversity. The diversity may come either from the region where you belong, so you're looking at local problems and saying, how do I handle it? Diversity may come because of the region that you are representing or you are coming from. So it could be, of course, we do have gender diversity, so we have to accept that as well. So I think that diversity that we have, and we do allow an openness in terms of allowing diverse opinions to come forward. And I think that openness that we allow, I think that is a wonderful culture which is there in India, and I would love to see that moving ahead. What is it that we should change? A couple of things that we need to change. But I think one key thing that we need to change is we have to start collaborating more. We have to build more teams. I think our teamwork has to get much stronger, because right from the beginning you would be hearing me say that it's teams which succeed, because today it's no way a single person who can work. And it's all about hard work, it's all about having, and that my earlier response brings in there, diversity will actually help you to strengthen what you're going to deliver. So I would like to see, I won't say change, because it's not that it's not happening, but I would like to see that being strengthened much more in terms of building larger teams, and teams not just limited to their own areas, being more inclusive, bringing in larger workforces. I'm sure India will succeed. And if we do that, uh, our ambition of being in the top few countries, it's something that is achievable. And I'm confident that the new India is going to achieve it. I'm confident that your science technology policy is going to collectively, what we are going to bring out as a policy is going to give us a roadmap to achieve that.
Thank you so much. That was a perfect ending and a perfect answer. Even though I do realize it was a bit tricky, but thank you for those encouraging words, and thank you so much for this conversation. I have really enjoyed it. I'm sure the audience has enjoyed this conversation too. So thank you once again, Dr. Swarup, and over to you now, Chigan, for the final word of thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah. Although we had in mind that we will drag it because the conversation is actually going, but we don't want to get scolded. Ki mera time se nikal diya. So 7:15 is what we are going to stick to. That's why we are not taking so many questions that are pending. But of course, Dr. Swarup, that you have agreed and you have generously offered also. So we are going to send the entire set of Excel sheet to you, whatever we have gathered. So from there, whatever
So
you would like.
the Chagun homework for you, you're not sending me an Excel sheet. You're going to group it together. You're going to put it in categories, and then you're going to send me the question, and I promise I'll answer.
Oh, perfect. That's exactly how I get shot down every time when I say something to anybody who is sitting in that seat. That's perfectly well. That's our work, and we will do it. And we are thankful that you gave us this time, and it's a very enjoyable, informal conversation. And we really, really appreciate that people of your stature coming to such conversations to openly discuss, that too live, not even recorded. And there are so many questions and comments that people have reflected, and we are going to again exchange notes on that. And I personally would like to thank you for bringing aspects related to international connect and how that is going to effectively improve our performance doing international connect, not just for the sake of doing an international connect. At the same time, it is not only limited to some of the national level stakeholders, but how do we really connect them to a fine granular stakeholder entity in the country, in the ecosystem, to the state level, to the city level, even to the level where it is not even related to science, but that still has beneficial limits to the science. I think all those points were very, very nicely put out. I think it has given a lot of thoughts for everyone who is involved and watching and listening to think over and contribute to this policy process. As you said, more inclusive and more decentralized thinking process towards making this policy. Also, I will just repeat what you just said. It's not our or your policy. We are collectively going to have a national policy where every stakeholder feels the ownership as well as the responsibility in implementing them. I think that is the key message. With that, let me take this last 1 or 2 minutes to thank the entire team which put this entire series together, and particularly the second series after the ministers event. Everybody can imagine how tough it is to actually like build the back end and the front end and make sure everything goes perfect. So I'm going to begin with saying your IT team, people who actually helped us set up this entire room and set up an audio and video, the script making, and the coordinator of this entire series from the STIP 2020 Secretariat, Dr. Nimita Pandey, who coordinated with you and briefed, and you had a discussion. I think she's also there in call. Also, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, who you already thanked, and every one of us are really thankful to him that he has given us this opportunity to work with complete freedom, to engage with experts and leaders, and also to the last mile, that we can do what really we want in terms of making this policy inclusive. He as a leader has shown many directions to us, and we are really thankful to him. And also we are thankful to DST Secretary and Office of PSA colleagues who are all making this possible and enabling this entire activity to go the way that is supposed to be going. Also our PSA, Professor J. Raghavan, who has been showing directions as and when it is required, and it's going perfectly in the same direction that we would really want it to. And with that, technically, I'd be saying thank you to the Science Policy Forum, who actually made this technical backend and the streaming perfectly well. And I'm seeing still the channel is going perfect with the participation. And Aditya Kaushik and the team is there on call as well, who is silently taking care of all of this. And I'm sure I'm missing so many other people, but I'm just going to say a big thank you to everyone who made this possible. And thank you so much, Dr. Swarup, for taking this time. And I'm just going to request all of you on call to stay for a minute, and we end the live session and we take a group photo, and then we'll end the call.
Thank you, Jagan. Thank you, all of you, Sarah, Nimita, Akhilesh, all of you all. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Aditya, we can end the live streaming now, and I request all the panelists on call to stay for one more minute just for a photograph.